Daniel was used to quiet evenings. Life on the human outpost was predictable, almost boring. His job as a maintenance worker meant his days were filled with checking systems, fixing broken panels, and walking the long steel corridors that hummed with the sound of engines and machinery. He often came back to his small room, sat on the edge of his bunk, and stared out of the narrow window at the endless black of space, speckled with distant stars. Tonight felt no different, or so he thought. He had just removed his boots and was about to make a cup of reheated coffee when he heard a sound. At first, it was so soft that he thought it might be the station creaking, as it often did. But then it came again. A knock, 3 quick taps on his door. Daniel froze. No one visited. His quarters. He had few friends here, and none of them would knock this late. Another knock came. Louder this time, hurried and desperate. Daniel hesitated, his hand hovering over the door panel. He thought about ignoring it. Maybe whoever it was would go away. But then he heard something else, a faint, trembling voice. It was hard to make out, but it sounded like one word, help. He pressed the door control. The door slid open with a soft hiss, and Daniel's breath caught in his throat. Standing there was not a human. She was young, her form slender yet strong, and her skin was a deep, rich teal blue that shimmered faintly. Under the station lights, she had a soft, natural beauty that Daniel had never seen before. Her features delicate and strange yet somehow familiar. Her hair, dark with a silvery sheen, fell in loose strands around her face. Her large eyes were wide with fear, and her breathing was uneven, as if she had been running for a long time. Daniel didn't know what to say. For a moment, he simply stared at her. Aliens were not unheard of on the fringes of human space, but seeing one this close, standing at his door, was something he never expected. Please, she said again, her voice shaking. Her accent was heavy, her words broken, but he understood her. She took a small step forward, glancing over her shoulder down the hallway. Daniel's instincts told him to close the door. This wasn't his problem. Whatever trouble she was in, it was dangerous. He could report her to station security, and they would handle it. That was the smart thing to do. But then he saw the look in her eyes. Desperation, fear, a silent plea. Without saying a word, Daniel grabbed her arm gently and pulled her inside. The door slid shut behind her, cutting off the view of the corridor. She stumbled slightly but didn't resist. Her breathing was still fast, and she pressed her back to the wall, holding something close to her chest. Daniel noticed it was a small, metallic object, no bigger than his palm. She clutched it tightly as if it was the most important thing in the galaxy. "Who are you?" Daniel finally asked, keeping his voice low. She looked at him, her lips parting as if she wanted to speak, but couldn't find the words. After a moment, she managed to say, "Lyra, Lyra." Daniel repeated, "All right, Lyra. What's going on? Why are you here?" She shook her head, unable to explain. She pointed toward the door and then made a gesture, as if mimicking footsteps. "They come." Daniel's stomach tightened. Someone was chasing her. He moved to the small window by his bunk and peered out into the corridor. At first, it was empty. Then he saw them. Tall figures moved down the hallway with a predator's precision. They were not human. They wore heavy, black exosuits that seemed to swallow the light. Their faces hidden behind smooth, featureless masks. Their steps were slow, but deliberate, and they carried weapons Daniel had never seen before. His heart pounded in his chest. He turned back to Lyra. "Who are they?" Her hands tightened round the metallic object. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Trackers." Daniel had never heard of them, but the words sent a chill through him. Whoever they were, they didn't look like they were here for a friendly visit. He swallowed hard. "Are they after you?" She nodded quickly. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. He had no idea why this alien woman was being hunted. But he knew one thing. If those armored creatures found her here, it wouldn't end well. He crouched down to her level, trying to make his voice calm. "You need to stay quiet. Do you understand?" She nodded again, her eyes locked on his. Trusting him despite barely knowing him, he moved to the door and listened. The footsteps were getting closer. He could hear the faint hum of their gear, the metallic clink of their weapons. They were searching room by room. Daniel's quarters were small, with nowhere good to hide. He glanced around, his mind racing for an idea. Then he remembered the maintenance hatch beneath his bed. It led to the service tunnels, narrow, cramped, spaces that ran through the station like veins. No one checked them unless they worked there. He pointed to the bed. Under, he whispered. Lyra didn't understand at first. Then he knelt, lifted the thin mattress, and pulled open the small hatch. She realized what he meant. She hesitated, her hand tightening on the pendant. "They'll find you here," Daniel said softly. "You need to hide." For a moment, she seemed torn, but then she crouched and crawled into the hatch. Daniel lowered the cover and pushed the bed back into place. Just as a heavy knock rattled his door, his heart nearly stopped. He stood frozen, staring at the door, hearing the low, mechanical voice of one of the hunters on the other side. They were here. Daniel stood still, his back pressed to the wall as the knock on his door echoed again. It wasn't the kind of knock a friend made. It was firm, heavy, and demanding. He could almost feel the weight of it through the metal frame. His mind raced. If he didn't answer, they might force their way in. If he did answer, they might step inside and find her. He glanced toward the bed where the maintenance hatch was hidden. He couldn't see her, but he imagined Lyra curled up in the dark tunnel, clutching whatever that metallic object was. The knock came again, louder this time. A voice followed, low and mechanical, speaking in a language Daniel couldn't understand. It wasn't human. He swallowed, trying to calm the shaking in his hands. He had to look natural. He had to make them think there was nothing unusual about this room. Daniel pressed the door panel. The door slid open with a hiss. Two figures stood there. They were taller than he expected. Their exhausts were sleek and angular, colored in shades of black and deep gray. The helmets they wore had no visible eyes or mouths, only a smooth, mirrored surface that reflected his own face back at him. Each carried a long, dark weapon, the design alien and intimidating. Daniel forced himself to keep his voice steady. "Can I help you?" The one in front tilted its head slightly, then spoke in a rough, broken version of human language. "You see her. Blue one." Daniel tried to look confused. "Blue one? I don't know what you're talking about." The figure stepped forward, its presence filling the small doorway. Daniel could feel the temperature drop slightly, or maybe it was just his fear making him shiver. "She runs. You see her." The alien's tone was flat, without emotion, but there was no mistaking the threat behind the words. Daniel shook his head. "No. Haven't seen anyone like that." The two figures were silent for a long moment. Daniel could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. He wondered if they could somehow hear it too. Finally, the one in front made a hand gesture to the other. The second alien stepped past Daniel into his quarters. "Wait," Daniel started, but the alien ignored him. It began scanning the room, its movements precise and deliberate. It checked the small table, the locker by the wall, even the narrow washroom in the corner. Daniel stayed near the doorway, forcing himself to act annoyed instead of terrified. "You can't just search my room like this," he said. But his voice lacked conviction. The alien gave no reply. The other one remained at the doorway, standing unnervingly still, as if its only purpose was to block Daniel from escaping. Daniel's stomach churned as the searching alien approached the bed. It reached down and lifted the mattress. He gripped his hands tightly at his sides, fighting to keep his breathing normal. If they found the hatch, it was over. But after a quick check, the alien dropped the mattress back in place. It didn't notice the faint seam of the hidden panel beneath. Daniel forced himself not to sigh with relief. The alien walked back toward the door. The first one gave Daniel a final look, tilting its head as if studying him. "If you see her," it said, "you tell." Daniel nodded quickly. "Sure. I'll let you know." They didn't reply. The two turned and walked away, their heavy footsteps echoing down the corridor until they faded. Daniel closed the door, his hands trembling as he leaned against it. He waited a full minute, listening carefully to make sure they were gone. Finally, he moved to the bed and pushed it aside, opening the hatch. Lyra was still there. curled up in the narrow space. Her wide eyes stared at him, shimmering with fear. "They're gone," Daniel whispered. She crawled out slowly, her movements cautious and graceful despite her obvious exhaustion. She held the metallic object close to her chest again, up close. Daniel could see it was shaped like a small disc, etched with strange symbols that glowed faintly. "You need to tell me what's going on," Daniel said quietly. Lyra hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. Her breathing was shallow, like she didn't know if she could trust him. Finally, she spoke in her broken human tongue. "They've trackers. They hunt me. Must not find me. Why?" Daniel asked. She paused. Then she pointed to the disc. "In her hands. This, they want, cannot take." Daniel stared at the object. It didn't look like a weapon. Maybe it was some kind of data storage. Whatever it was important enough for those armored creatures to chase her across the station. He rubbed his forehead. "You can't stay here. If they come back and search again, they'll find you." Her eyes darted to the door, then back to him. "Help me, please." Daniel didn't know what to say. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a hero. He was just a maintenance worker living in the quiet corner of human space. Getting involved in something like this was dangerous. But then he saw her hands shaking as she held the disc, and the way she tried to stand tall despite the fear written across her face. She had come to his door, knowing nothing about him, because she had no one else. Daniel sighed. "All right, I'll help you. But we need to be smart about this." She blinked, as if surprised he had agreed. He walked to his locker and grabbed his work tablet, pulling up a station map. "There's a maintenance route," he explained, tracing the path with his finger. "It connects to the cargo bay. If we can get you there, you might be able to sneak onto a ship." She nodded quickly, her teal-blue skin catching the dim light of the room. "But first," Daniel said, "you need to rest. You're exhausted, and we need to wait until the patrols calm down. Once the halls are quieter, we'll move." Lyra hesitated, but finally sat on the edge of his bed, still holding the disc. Daniel pulled a chair to the door and sat, listening for any sign of the trackers outside. The room was silent except for the soft hum of the station's systems. For now, they were safe. But Daniel knew this was only the beginning. The next few hours dragged on like days. Daniel stayed in his chair near the door, listening for every sound in the corridor. His ears were tuned to the hum of the station and the occasional clang of distant footsteps. Every time he thought he heard movement outside, his heart jumped. Lyra had stayed quiet the entire time. She sat on the bed with her knees drawn up, her back against the wall, clutching the strange disc to her chest. Her breathing had slowed, and Daniel wondered if she had managed to rest even for a few minutes. She didn't look like someone who could sleep easily. Daniel finally stood and stretched. His legs were stiff, and his back ached from sitting too long. He glanced at her. "We can't stay here much longer," he said softly. She looked up at him, her large eyes showing she understood, even if his words were not completely clear to her. She gave a small nod. Daniel walked to the wall screen and pulled up a map of the station. He traced a path with his finger. "This leads to the maintenance tunnels. It'll take us toward the cargo bay. From there, I can get you to an escape ship, or at least hide you where they won't find you." Lyra tilted her head, her expression questioning. "Safe?" she asked. Daniel gave a dry laugh. "Not really, but safer than here." Her grip on the disc tightened. She seemed to gather her courage, then stood. She was taller than he expected when she wasn't curled up. Her movements were graceful, almost too smooth for someone who had been running for her life. Daniel grabbed a small toolkit and slung it over his shoulder. If anyone stopped him, he could say he was on repair duty. He glanced at Lyra. "Keep your head down and follow me." She nodded again. He opened the door carefully and peered out. The corridor looked empty, but that didn't comfort him. He stepped out first, motioning for her to follow. Her bare feet made no sound against the metal floor as she walked behind him. The station felt different now. It was no longer the dull, familiar place Daniel had known for months. Every shadow looked threatening. Every noise felt like a warning. They reached the first maintenance hatch, tucked between two bulkhead panels. Daniel knelt and entered his access code, then slid it open. The tunnel beyond was narrow and dark, just enough space for someone to crawl through. "You first," he whispered. Lyra hesitated for a moment, then crouched and slipped inside. Daniel followed, pulling the hatch shut behind them. The space smelled of metal and oil, and the air felt warmer here. The tunnels were long and winding, lit only by the faint glow of service lights. Daniel had been in them hundreds of times for repairs, but they had never felt this dangerous before. They moved slowly, crawling through the narrow space. Daniel kept checking the map on his tablet, making sure they stayed on the right path. After several minutes of silence, Lyra finally spoke. "Why help me?" Daniel glanced back at her. "Would you rather I didn't?" She shook her head quickly. "No, just, why?" Daniel paused, thinking. "Because you knocked on my door. Because you were scared. Because you needed help. And I could help." She stared at him for a long moment, then said softly, "Thank you." Daniel didn't reply. He kept moving. They had just rounded a corner in the tunnels when a loud metallic clang echoed from somewhere ahead. Daniel froze. Lyra stiffened behind him, her fingers tightening on the disc. Voices followed. Harsh, mechanical, speaking in that same alien tongue Daniel didn't understand. But he didn't need to know the words. He knew what they meant. The trackers were in the tunnels. Daniel's pulse raced. He switched off his tablet to kill its glow. The darkness wrapped around them like a blanket. He leaned close to Lyra and whispered, "Stay quiet." She nodded, her breathing quick but controlled. The voices grew louder, echoing through the metal walls. Daniel could hear the sound of heavy boots on the crawlspace floor. They weren't far. He scanned the tunnel. Up ahead, there was a side passage, a smaller duct used for wiring. It was tight, but it might hide them. "Come on," he whispered. They crawled quickly into the side duct. It was even narrower than the tunnel, forcing them to press close against the walls. Daniel lay flat on his stomach, holding his breath. The trackers entered the main tunnel. Daniel could see the faint glow of their equipment through the slits in the duct walls. Their footsteps were heavy and deliberate, their movements slow as they searched. Lyra pressed herself against the wall, her hand trembling as she held the disc. The trackers paused. One of them spoke, its voice low and guttural. Daniel felt his skin crawl. For a moment, he thought they might open the duct and find them. He could already imagine their cold, mirrored helmets turning toward him. Then, after what felt like forever, they moved on, their footsteps fading into the distance. Daniel waited several minutes, his ears straining for any sign they were coming back. When he was certain they were gone, he let out the breath he had been holding. He glanced at Lyra. Even in the darkness, he could see her wide, terrified eyes. "We need to move faster," he said. They crawled out of the side duct and continued through the tunnels, their movements quicker now. Daniel kept one hand on the wall to steady himself. At last, they reached a ladder that led up to another hatch. Daniel climbed first and carefully opened it. Cool air rushed in. He peeked out and saw the faint glow of the cargo bay in the distance. He turned to Lyra. "We're close. Just a little further." She gave a small, determined nod. But as they climbed out of the tunnel, a sound froze them both. A voice. That same low, mechanical tone. Daniel turned his head slowly. Standing at the far end of the corridor was one of the trackers. It had found them. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. The tracker at the far end of the corridor was perfectly still. Its smooth black helmet turned toward them. The mirrored surface of its mask reflected the dim corridor lights, giving it an eerie, inhuman presence. For a second, no one moved. Daniel's heart pounded so loudly he thought the alien might hear it. Then the tracker tilted its head slightly, as if analyzing them, and started walking forward. Its heavy boots echoed against the metal floor with a slow, deliberate rhythm. "Run." Daniel whispered. Lyra didn't need to be told twice. She clutched the strange disc to her chest and bolted down the corridor beside him. The tracker's pace quickened. It raised one arm, and Daniel saw a strange device attached to its forearm begin to glow faintly. He didn't know what it was, but he was certain it wasn't good. They sprinted as fast as they could. Daniel leading her toward the faint light ahead, the cargo bay. His toolkit banged against his side with every step, and his lungs burned. As they pushed themselves forward, a loud metallic sound rang out behind them. Daniel risked a glance over his shoulder and saw the tracker extend its weapon. A beam of energy shot past them, sizzling against the wall. The smell of scorched metal filled the air. Faster, Daniel shouted, his voice hoarse. They reached the end of the corridor and skidded round the corner. Nearly crashing into a supply cart, Daniel pushed it over, hoping it might slow the alien down. He knew it wouldn't stop it for long, but anything was better than nothing. Ahead, a large cargo door stood partially open, revealing the vast storage area beyond. They dashed inside, weaving between tall stacks of crates. Daniel grabbed Lyra's arm and pulled her behind one of the larger containers. They crouched low, breathing hard. The tracker's footsteps grew louder as it entered the bay. The sound of its boots on the floor echoed through the massive room. It was hunting them. Daniel leaned close to Lyra. "We can't outrun it in here. We need a plan." Lyra nodded, though her wide eyes betrayed her fear. "What do?" she whispered. Daniel looked around. The cargo bay was filled with containers, machinery, and maintenance equipment. Somewhere in here had to be something they could use. He spotted a stack of fuel canisters secured against the wall. If they could lure the tracker near them and cause an explosion, it might give them enough time to escape. But the idea came with a problem. One wrong move and they wouldn't survive either. He turned back to Lyra. "Stay hidden," he whispered. She grabbed his arm. "No, I help." Daniel blinked at her. "You help? How?" Lyra opened her hand, revealing the strange disc she'd been clutching. Up close, Daniel could see that it wasn't just a simple object. Tiny etched symbols pulsed with faint light, shifting like they were alive. "This," she said quietly, "can disrupt short time." Daniel didn't understand exactly what she meant, but he guessed it was some kind of alien tech that could interfere with the tracker's equipment. "Can you use it?" he asked. She nodded once. Before he could respond, the tracker's voice echoed through the cargo bay. It was speaking in its guttural language. But even without knowing the words, Daniel could hear the promise in its tone. It would find them. The sound of its steps grew closer. Daniel pointed toward the fuel canisters. "We draw it there. You use that thing. I'll trigger the canisters." Lyra gave a firm nod. They moved quickly, staying low and using the crates for cover. Daniel's pulse raced as he peeked around a corner. The tracker was only a few rows away, moving slowly but steadily, scanning between the stacks of cargo. Daniel gestured for Lyra to move to the other side of the bay. She nodded and slipped away, her movements surprisingly quiet and fluid. Daniel crept toward the fuel canisters, keeping his eyes locked on the alien. The tracker paused near the center of the room, its head tilted again, as if it sensed them. Then it raised its arm, and a scanning beam of light swept across the bay. Daniel ducked just in time, pressing his back to the crate. His heart hammered in his chest. Suddenly, a high-pitched hum filled the air. Daniel glanced toward Lyra and saw her holding out the disc. The glowing symbols on it brightened, pulsing faster. The tracker reacted instantly. It jerked slightly, its movements becoming stiff and jerky as if its systems were being disrupted. The hum grew louder, and for a moment, it seemed frozen. Daniel seized the chance. He grabbed a heavy wrench from his toolkit and slammed it against the locking mechanism. On the nearest canister, the metal dented, and a thin hiss of fuel began to leak out. The tracker let out a distorted growl-like sound and turned sharply toward Lyra. "Now!" Daniel shouted. Lyra threw the disc onto the floor. It exploded in a burst of bright energy, sending a wave of static across the bay. The tracker staggered, its weapon arm dropping to its side. Daniel didn't wait. He grabbed a maintenance flare from his kit, struck it, and hurled it toward the leaking canisters. The explosion was deafening. A massive fireball erupted, knocking Daniel off his feet. He hit the ground hard, his ears ringing. When the smoke cleared slightly, he saw the tracker lying on the floor near the blast site, its armor scorched and its movements sluggish. It was still alive, but the explosion had damaged it. "Go!" Daniel yelled. Lyra ran to him and helped him to his feet. They didn't look back as they sprinted toward the far side of the cargo bay, where a smaller door led to another corridor. They burst through it just as the tracker behind them began to rise again. Daniel slammed the door shut and locked it. His hands shook as he leaned against the wall, trying to catch his breath. Lyra stood beside him, her chest heaving. Her teal blue skin glistened in the dim light, and she still clutched the disc tightly. Daniel looked at her. "You saved us back." There, she met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "We save each other," she said simply. Daniel managed a small, tired smile. Fair enough. For the first time, he realized they weren't just running together anymore. They were working together, and somehow that made him feel a little less helpless. But the brief sense of relief didn't last. The tracker was still alive, and it wouldn't stop. "We need to keep moving," Daniel said. Lyra nodded, and together they disappeared down the corridor, knowing the hunt was far from over. Daniel and Lyra moved quickly through the dim corridor, their footsteps echoing softly on the metal floor. Every few seconds, Daniel glanced back, half expecting the tracker to burst through the door behind them. He didn't know how badly the explosion had hurt it, but he knew one thing for certain. It wasn't going to stop. "We can't stay here," Daniel said, his voice low but urgent. "They'll search the whole bay. They'll find us." Lyra nodded silently, still clutching the strange disc tightly. Her breathing was uneven, but her face showed determination. Daniel pulled up a map on his work tablet. He zoomed in on them station schematics, looking for any path that could take them far away from the cargo area. His finger traced the lines of maintenance carters and ventilation shafts. Finally, he found what he needed. "There," he said, pointing to a narrow path that connected the cargo sector to the docking area. "If we can make it through the tunnels and get to the docking ring, we can find a way off the station, maybe. A supply shuttle. Something." Lyra tilted her head slightly, studying the map, then pointed to a section of the corridor. "Trackers?" she asked. Daniel grimaced. "Probably. But it's our best chance." She hesitated for a moment, then gave a firm nod. They set off again, following the winding maintenance route. The tunnels were narrower than the cargo bay passageways, forcing them to move single file. The faint hum of the station's engines vibrated through the walls, a constant reminder that this place was alive, even if it felt empty. As they crawled through one of the tighter ducts, Daniel finally spoke. "Lyra," he said, his voice softer now. "Why are they after you? What is that thing you're carrying?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she shifted slightly, as if considering whether to tell him. Finally, she spoke. "This," she said, lifting the disc slightly, "is key. My people, enslaved. Trackers work for them." Daniel frowned. "Your people are enslaved," she nodded. "War came. We lose. They take our cities, our worlds. This key," she tapped the disc, "can help free us. But if they take it, all hope is gone." Daniel stared at the disc. It didn't look like much, just a small piece of alien technology with glowing symbols. But the way she held it, the way her voice changed when she spoke of it, told him everything he needed to know. "This was no ordinary device, and you're willing to die for it," he said quietly. She didn't hesitate. "Yes." Daniel crawled forward in silence for a few moments. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't someone who took on grand missions to save civilizations. He was just a man who fixed broken panels and patched up wiring. Yet here he was, risking his life for an alien woman carrying something that could change the fate of her people. "You came to the right door," he said finally, surprising himself with the words. Lyra looked at him curiously. He shrugged. "I'm not going to let them take you. We'll get you out of here, somehow." For the first time since they met, she gave him a small, faint smile. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep him going. They kept crawling until the tunnel opened into a small service room. Daniel checked his map. They were getting close to the docking ring, but that also meant they were entering one of the more heavily patrolled areas. He turned to Lyra. "We'll have to move carefully. If they see us out here, it's over." She nodded, tightening her grip on the disc. Daniel cracked the door open just enough to peek outside. The docking ring corridor stretched out ahead of them, brightly lit and lined with thick blast doors. It was quiet. Stay close. Daniel whispered. They stepped out, moving quickly but cautiously. Daniel's eyes scanned every corner, every doorway, expecting to see one of those dark, armored shapes at any moment. They had almost made it to the docking platform when Daniel heard it, the low, mechanical hum of a tracker. Down, he hissed, pulling Lyra behind a large supply crate. The tracker appeared at the far end of the corridor, its helmet scanning the area with a faint glow. It hadn't seen them yet, but it was coming their way. Daniel's pulse quickened. They couldn't go back, and they couldn't fight it in the open. They needed a distraction. His eyes darted to a nearby control panel. If he could trigger the emergency doors to shut in a different section of the docking ring, it might draw the tracker away. He leaned close to Lyra. Stay here. Don't move. She grabbed his wrist. Danger? I know, he said, pulling free. But if I don't, we're done. He crept toward the panel, staying low and using the crates for cover. Every step felt like it took an eternity. He reached the panel and quickly bypassed the lock with his maintenance codes. The tracker's footsteps grew louder. It was only a few meters away now. Daniel took a deep breath and slammed his hand on the emergency override. A loud alarm blared, and a set of heavy blast doors on the far side of the ring slammed shut. The tracker stopped, turning its head toward the noise. After a moment, it started moving in that direction. Daniel exhaled in relief and quickly slipped back to Lyra. Come on, he whispered. They ran silently toward the docking platform while the tracker was distracted. When they reached the platform, Daniel's heart sank. The supply shuttles were all locked down. They needed access codes to get aboard, and Daniel didn't have them. He racked his brain for options. Then he remembered. The maintenance bay, a smaller, older shuttle often used by workers. It wasn't much, but it could get them away from the station. This way, he said. Leading Lyra to the maintenance bay. When they arrived, Daniel nearly cursed out loud. The bay was guarded. 2 more trackers stood at the door, their weapons at the ready. Daniel crouched behind a crate, pulling Lyra down beside him. There's no way past them without being seen, he whispered. Lyra stared at the trackers, then at the disc in her hands. I can disrupt again. Like before. Daniel shook his head. It almost killed you last time. You can't, she interrupted. No choice. Before he could stop her, she stepped out from behind the crate and activated the disc. The symbols on it glowed brightly, and a piercing hum filled the air. The 2 trackers jerked violently, their movements becoming erratic. Now, Daniel, Lyra shouted. Daniel didn't hesitate. He sprinted to the door panel and used his override codes. The door slid open, and they ran inside the maintenance bay. Daniel jumped into the shuttle's cockpit and powered it up. The old engines groaned in protest, but the systems came online. Hold on, he yelled as he slammed the controls forward. The shuttle lifted off the platform just as the trackers began to recover. Daniel didn't look back. He pushed the engines as hard as they could go, leaving the station and the hunters behind them. As the stars stretched into streaks outside the window, Daniel finally allowed himself to breathe. They had escaped, for now. The shuttle rattled as Daniel pushed its aging engines to their limits. The vibration shook the controls under his hands, and the groan of the ship made it clear this vessel had not been built for speed. But there was no turning back now. They were leaving the station, and that was the only thing that mattered. Lyra sat in the co-pilot's seat, still holding the strange disc to her chest. Her breathing was steady, but her wide eyes kept darting to the windows as if she expected danger to appear at any moment. Are we safe? She asked, her voice quiet but tense. Daniel shook his head. Not yet. They'll come after us. Trackers. Like that. Don't give up. As if on cue, a sharp alarm rang out from the shuttle's console. Daniel's stomach dropped. He tapped the screen, and his fears were confirmed. A ship had left the station. No, not just one. 2. They're coming, he said grimly, through the rear camera. He saw them, 2 small, dark ships cutting through space with terrifying speed. Their sharp, angular designs matched the tracker's armor, built for pursuit and combat. Daniel's fingers tightened on the controls. Hold on. He shifted the shuttle sharply, sending it diving toward a nearby asteroid field. The stars blurred as they sped toward the jagged cluster of rocks drifting in the void. Lyra grabbed the side of her seat. Dangerous? Daniel gave a humorless laugh. Extremely. But it's our only chance. Those ships are faster than this bucket. We need to make them work to catch us. The shuttle plunged into the asteroid field. The rocks loomed large around them. Spinning slowly in the endless void, Daniel weaved between them, pulling hard on the controls to keep them from crashing. Every near miss made his heart pound. Harder dot behind them, the alien ships followed. Their sleek designs allowed them to maneuver with frightening precision. A beam of bright energy shot past the shuttle, grazing the side and making the hull shudder. They're firing, Daniel yelled, though. It was obvious. He swerved sharply, nearly scraping the side of a massive asteroid. Lyra clutched the disc tighter and looked at him. Can we fight? Daniel barked a short laugh. Fight? This is a maintenance shuttle. We're lucky it even flies. There are no weapons here. Lyra's jaw tightened. She looked at the disc. Then at him. I can use this. Disrupt them. Daniel glanced at her. Like you did before? Can it work on ships? She hesitated, then nodded. Short time. Enough to escape. Daniel didn't like the uncertainty in her tone, but he didn't see another option. Do it, he said. She closed her eyes for a moment, as if centering herself, then placed the disc on the console. The glowing symbols on it pulsed faster and brighter, filling the cockpit with a strange humming sound. Almost instantly, the pursuing ships reacted. Their formation faltered, and their movements became erratic. One of them veered off course, narrowly avoiding an asteroid. It's working, Daniel said, relief washing over him. But then he noticed something else. The shuttle's systems were flickering. The disruption wasn't just affecting the pursuers. Their own ship was suffering too. Lyra, turn it off, he shouted. She grabbed the disc and deactivated it. The humming stopped, and the symbols dimmed. The shuttle's lights steadied, but their pursuers had recovered too. They're still coming. Daniel muttered. The asteroid field began to thin, giving way to open space again. Daniel cursed under his breath. Without the cover of the rocks, the trackers would have a clear shot at them. He needed another plan, fast. His eyes darted to the navigation screen. A blinking signal caught his attention. A nearby debris field, remnants of a destroyed freighter. It was large enough to hide them, at least for a while. Daniel angled the shuttle toward it. Hang on! They rocketed toward the twisted wreckage of the freighter. Massive chunks of metal floated silently in the void. Spinning slowly like dead giants. Daniel guided the shuttle into the debris field. Weaving between the wreckage, he slowed the engines to minimize their heat signature. Why? Stop, Lyra asked. We're not stopping, Daniel said. We're hiding. If we keep running in a straight line, they'll catch us. But if they can't see us, we have a chance. He powered down most of the shuttle's systems, leaving only the essentials running. The interior went dim, and the hum of the engines quieted to a low whisper. Lyra sat perfectly still, her eyes fixed on the window. Minutes passed like hours. Then Daniel saw them, the tracker ships. They flew past the debris field, scanning for them. Daniel held his breath. Come on, just keep going. The ships slowed, hovering for a moment. One of them fired a beam into the wreckage, causing a chunk of metal to explode. Daniel flinched but kept the shuttle still. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the two ships turned and flew off in the opposite direction, their engines glowing as they disappeared into the distance. Daniel exhaled deeply, slumping back in his seat. I think we lost them. Lyra looked at him, her face a mixture of relief and exhaustion. Safe? She asked. Daniel nodded slowly. For now. They sat in silence for a while. The only sounds the faint creaks of the old shuttle and the quiet hum of its remaining systems. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. Where do you need to go? If that disc can save your people, there has to be somewhere safe to take it. Lyra stared at the device in her hands. Homeworld gone. Cannot go back. But there's place, hidden outpost, allies. They wait for this. Daniel nodded. Then we'll get you there. She turned to him, her expression softening. Why help me? You could leave. Daniel gave a tired smile. Because you knocked on my door. And because someone has to stand up to them. For a moment, she just looked at him, as if trying to understand him fully. Then she gave a small nod. Daniel leaned back in his seat, staring at the wreckage outside. They had escaped for now, but he knew it wasn't over. The trackers wouldn't stop. They'd follow them across the galaxy if they had to, and somehow, Daniel was okay with that. The quiet of the wreckage field could not last forever. Daniel knew it, and so did Lyra. They had only bought themselves a little time, and time was running out. The trackers would scan the area again, and when they did, they would find the shuttle. Daniel checked the navigation screen. We're still a long way from that outpost you mentioned, he said, his voice low but steady. Lyra, who had been staring silently at the disk in her lap, looked up at him. How long? Daniel exhaled. 2 hours at full speed. But this ship isn't built for speed, and when they find us, we won't outrun them. Lyra's gaze dropped back to the disk. They will not stop. Not until I'm dead and this is gone. Daniel tightened his grip on the controls. He had no idea how much weight the disk carried, but if what Lyra said was true, it was more than a simple piece of tech. It was the hope of an entire people. He turned to her. We're going to get you there, even if it costs me everything. Lyra blinked at him, surprised by his words. You would die for this? Daniel gave a dry laugh. I'd rather live for it, but if that's the price, then yeah. Before Lyra could answer, the shuttle's console began to beep sharply. Daniel's heart sank. He tapped the screen. The signals were closing in fast. They're back, he said grimly. He pushed the throttle forward. The engines groaned as the shuttle sped out of the debris field into open space. Stars stretched around them as the ship clawed for speed, but Daniel knew it was useless. The tracker ships were faster, more advanced, and armed within minutes. They appeared on the scanner, cutting through the darkness like silent predators. Lyra gripped the edge of her seat. What do we do? Daniel stared at the screen, his mind racing. We can't fight them, and we can't outrun them. Then his eyes drifted to the disk in Lyra's hands. But maybe we can outsmart them. She tilted her head. How? He pointed to the device. You said it can disrupt their systems. Could it shut them down long enough for us to escape? Lyra hesitated. Yes, but it will burn out. No use after. Daniel nodded. That's fine. We only need one chance. But deep inside, Daniel knew that wasn't entirely true. Even if they disabled the ships, the trackers would still follow them later. They'd keep coming until they were both dead. Unless he made sure they could in single quotes t. Daniel set his jaw. We're going to give them what they want. Lyra frowned. What do you mean? We'll make them think they've won. Daniel said. They'll chase this shuttle, but you won't be on it. Her eyes widened. No, I will not leave you. Daniel shook his head. Listen to me. You said this disc could free your people. That makes you more important than me. If you die, everything dies with you. I can't let that happen. She looked at him for a long moment, her hands tightening around the disc. You would stay behind. Daniel forced a smile. Someone has to fly this thing straight at them. Someone they'll keep chasing. Lyra shook her head. No, there must be another way. Daniel reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder. This is the way. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then slowly, Lyra nodded. She didn't like it, but she understood. Daniel guided the shuttle toward a nearby moon, a barren, cratered rock with no atmosphere and plenty of places to hide. He set it on a descent path and landed in a dark crater, the landing rough and uneven. He turned to Lyra. There's an escape pod in the back. It's small, but it has enough fuel to get you to the outpost. She looked at him with conflicted eyes. You will die. Daniel swallowed hard. Maybe. But if I don't do this, we both die, and then none of this matters. Lyra hesitated, then leaned forward slightly. You're brave, Daniel. He gave a small laugh. That's generous. Mostly I'm scared out of my mind. They moved quickly. Daniel helped her into the pod, showing her the controls. Once I take off, they'll come after me. Wait. 5 minutes, then launch, stay low, and avoid their sensors. Lyra gripped his hand tightly before leaving. "Thank you." Daniel nodded, unable to say more. She climbed into the pod and sealed it. Daniel watched as the hatch closed, his chest tightening. He had only known her for a short time, but it felt like longer. Once she was ready, Daniel took the shuttle back into space. The trackers were waiting. As soon as he cleared the moon's shadow, they locked on. Daniel gritted his teeth and pushed the shuttle to full speed, drawing them away from Lyra's pod. Energy beams streaked past his ship, narrowly missing. The console screamed warnings as the shields began to fail. "Come on, you bastards," Daniel muttered. "Follow me." The trackers gave chase. Just as he hoped, Daniel swerved toward a massive gas giant ahead, its swirling clouds glowing faintly. He dove into its upper atmosphere, the turbulence shaking the shuttle violently. The alien ships followed, their weapons hammering his hull. Alarms blared. Systems failed one by one. The shuttle was coming apart, but Daniel didn't care. He had done his part. Lyra was safe. As the ship's systems finally gave out, Daniel closed his eyes. "Worth it," he whispered. And then everything went white. Hours later, far away from the gas giant, a small escape pod drifted silently toward an unmarked station hidden among the stars. Inside, Lyra held the disc close and stared at the stars. Daniel was gone, but his sacrifice had given her a chance. She would not waste it. Her people would be free, and somewhere in the silent darkness, she whispered his name.